Alright, this is a remake of this video. I made the original late last night, but I felt like I talked too fast and did not give you enough time to write things down, and end up covering a lot of ground, probably 30-something slides, but I feel like maybe it'll benefit you more if I kind of redo this and just slow it down, give you time to write. I did not print out the slides that have the note lines on the side because I haven't been there. I did, however, add those to Google Classroom. So for today, this video link will be on Google Classroom, so you could go back if you want and rewatch this after you print out the note slides, or you could go and take the Cornell notes, find some sheets up front, take your notes or take them on a piece of paper, and you can add them later. However you want to do it, but we're going to go through this today, so I'm going to kind of slow it down a little bit and allow you to take notes a little bit better than I did the last video I made. And we're just going to get into it. So we talked last time about how a bill becomes a law, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about how all the different parts of Congress come together, the different committees, the different rules and things like that, and how it all goes into the policy-making process. All right, so first we're going to talk about the duties of Congress. As you know, the legislative branch and Congress, all it's made up of, their main job is making laws. Okay, that's the main duty of Congress. But then we're going to talk about the different committee members. Okay, we talked last week about how obviously that they vote on laws and and determine which laws they want to move forward with, but most of the work is done in committee. Okay, we talked about how they break up into different committees so they can divvy up the thousands of bills they receive. They'll break up into smaller subcommittees, and they will look at these laws, or these bills rather, and determine whether or not they should move forward to the bigger groups. And these committees are made up of people who should be somewhat experts in their field. People who may have some kind of background in education are going to look at a lot of the education bills. Okay, people that deal with different things try to be paired up with bills that they kind of have an understanding of, to where they can research it, look into it, use their they have all these different people, assistants under them that can go out and look at things. We talked about how they poll constituents, see what they think about certain bills, and they utilize all this information to move forward with bills that they feel like really have a good chance of passing and that is needed to pass. But most of the work is done in committee. All right, one committee we're going to talk about, the first one, is called a standing committee. Okay, these are committees, there are about 20 in the House and 17 in the Senate, and they deal with issues that are permanent within the legislation. Okay, environmental committees, education committees, budget committees. These are things that are permanent, and they're always there because they're always needed. Okay, and of course each of them have several subcommittees under them. You have Rules Committee. Okay, this committee acts as the traffic cop of the House. Okay, decides what measures to consider. This is only takes place in the House, and we'll talk a little bit more about Rules Committee later. But basically, they're the ones that decide just the agenda on the floor of what bills are being heard, when they're heard, how much time they're given, and things like that. Give you a few minutes to look at this, write this down if you need to. A little awkward silence. And once again, like I said, you can always go back and look at this later, especially if you're going to take brief notes right now and fill in later. You can go back and pause this if you need to add in. All right, moving on. All right, the next kind of committee is called a select committee. Okay, this deals with temporary issues, okay, such as investigations, anything that may come up that is not a permanent situation. Anything that arises that, from year to year that is not ordinary through a congressional session. These are called select committees. Then you have a joint committee. Okay, this is made up of members of both houses. There are currently four different joint committees. They hash through things that that are needed. Both people from both houses are needed to discuss certain things. Then you have a conference committee. The conference committee also is made up of members from different houses, but their main goal is to make sure that certain bills, or any bill that being considered by both houses are identical. Okay, we talked earlier on that if the bill is not identical, then it cannot pass. If there's one thing that's different in either one, it cannot pass. So the conference committee will meet to make sure these bills are identical, worded exactly the same. That way they can get passed through. Then you have the Legislative Oversight Committee. They monitor the bureaucracy. We talked earlier about how bureaucracy is basically just a fancy word for all the workings of the government. But they monitor this and make sure that any kind of laws or any kind of policies that are put into place are actually carried out. The execution of laws, and they also determine if there's any corruption being done in any part of the governmental system. So that's what the Legislative Oversight Committee does. They go in and basically just pour through things with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that everything's going like it's supposed to. All right, another duty of Congress, the representatives of their constituents. Okay, basically they are the mouthpiece of the people. Okay, you and I, at any point, if we have concerns, we're supposed to be able to reach out to our congressperson, voice our concerns, and they get that concern to the lower level, the base level of government. So that's one of the duties they're supposed to do. May not always work that way, but that it's designed to give us that floor to talk about what we need to talk about. They're servants of constituents, so there's a lot of things that they're supposed to provide for us. You can go onto the individual congressperson's website and see things. You can go in there and get like passports through there. You can request a flag. There's all kinds of things that they will provide for their constituents of their districts. And the last part, they're just politicians. Okay, their job, their duty is to continue to try to get reelected, to campaign, to work to try to reach out to the people and provide a connection between the people and the government. All right, now we're going to move on and talk about debate rules and things like that. When they start get into each house, how they debate different bills and how they talk about certain things. These are chamber and debate rules for each house. The House of Representatives is more centralized leadership. Okay, such a large body that they have to. The majority party usually has a lot more power in the House of Representatives. The Rules Committee controls the agenda. We talked earlier about the Rules Committee. Lots and lots of power, and it's controlled by the majority party. So, minority party sometimes can get kind of left out because the minority party can get left out because the majority party kind of rules, as far as what we're going to hear, what we're going to talk about. So they can pretty much just shut out anything that they don't want to talk about that pertains to the other party. So it's very, very important in the House of Representatives. It's very, beneficial rather, if you are a part of the majority party. There is limited debate time, which is set forth by the Rules Committee. They may give certain bills certain amounts of time to be talked about before it goes to a vote. Where we'll talk about in the Senate here in a minute, that's not the case. The Speaker of the House is very powerful in the House of Representatives. Okay, it's the most senior member of the majority party, and they kind of can control the whole deal. So they have a lot of power. Senate is less centralized leadership, smaller group, usually a lot smaller margin of majority minority, so it's more the power spread out more amongst the group. Committees have less authority. Okay, so there's not a committee that rules all the ins and outs of the discussion and things like that. Very loose debate rules. Okay, you have the power to filibuster. We'll talk about that here in a minute. We have a little video we're going to watch, about 5 or 6 minutes, that goes into explaining the filibuster more. And the filibuster can be stopped with a cloture. Okay, basically a supermajority, 60 votes out of 100 to stop the filibuster. And back in the day, it was not used very much because it can be very strenuous on the person trying to filibuster. Strom Thurmond has holds the record for the longest filibuster over 24 hours. And loosely, the rules of this is once you start talking, there can be multiple senators that talk, but somebody has to always be on the floor, continuously holding, the spot, so to speak, and talking for the duration of this filibuster. So if one person is doing it on their own, they have to stand, and they cannot relinquish that microphone until they're done. And once they stop, they're done. They can have water, but there's no food. They cannot go to the restroom. They can't sit down. They have to stand and talk continuously. Now, if another senator were to come up and take their part into account, then the other senator could, at that point, excuse himself to the restroom. But for the most part, once you get going, you're there. Okay, until either they make a vote, a cloture of a supermajority of 60 people to decide to end the filibuster. But there's rarely been a supermajority in the Senate, so therefore somebody, a couple people from the other party other side of the party lines would have to actually go against their party to make it stop. So it's used to be a very big deal, but now just the threat of a filibuster, the talk of it, can sometimes make them move to vote for the cloture. Leaders have less power, except for the majority leader, who is the senior member of the majority party. They have a little bit more power to determine how things are going to be ran in the Senate. All right, next we're going to talk about the roles of the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, party leadership in both chambers. We're going to talk right now about congressional leadership in the House. All right, the highest ranking member of the majority party, like I said just a few minutes ago, is the Speaker of the House, currently Nancy Pelosi. Then you have the majority leader, and they represent their party on the floor. So they are the ones that are down speaking on the actual House floor. The majority whip assists leadership in managing the party's legislative program. Basically, their job is, for either majority or minority party, is to go around and determine how their members are going to vote. Basically polling them to try to see if they have support on certain things, if they need to try to flip somebody or garnish support, maybe how the other side, they can kind of figure out how the other party is going to vote, certain members, to see if anybody's going to vote with them. They really don't probably go poll them themselves, but they try to find that information out. But they basically they get the pulse of what's going on the floor in terms of the vote on certain things, to where they can kind of change or modify their strategy on what they're doing for that particular bill. You have the assistant speaker. They assist the majority leader in getting information out to the floor, to the rest of the House. Then you have your minority leader, does the same thing. They represent their party on the floor. And your minority whip does the same thing. They basically try to gain the pulse, or find out what's going on within their party as far as voting. More or less, we have the majority leader and the majority whip, and the minority leader and minority whip. But for the most part, the minority groups, like right now, the Republicans are the minority in the House. So they don't really call themselves a minority leader or minority whip. They usually just call themselves by their particular party. So right now you have the majority leader, majority whip, and then you have the Republican leader and Republican whip. Democratic caucus chairman. This person here is basically the person for the Democratic party. And another way to say it is Republican caucus or chairman, or you can say conference chairman. Basically, they deal with the committees. They organize their committees. They decide who goes to what. They basically give assignments out to all the different members and put them into the committees and determine who goes where and who does what. Then you have the policy committee chairman. They head conference forum for policy development, not as important as the other parts. Give you a few moments to write this down. All right, I'm about to move on, and feel free to pause this if you need to a little more time. I'm about to move on here in about 15, 20 seconds, but if you need to pause it at this point. All right. All right, so the president of the Senate, who is the vice president, and basically their only job is to break any tie that may happen in the Senate. So if you get a 50-50 vote, then the vice president will come in and break that tie. That's really his only role in Senate, is to break the tie. And it actually happens sometimes. So Betsy DeVos, who was the Secretary of Education, came in. They had a 50-50 vote. There were some people that jumped party lines and ended up with a tie, and the vice president had to break that tie, which obviously they're going to decide on. They're going to, vote on the side of the presidential party. So, who is the person who actually appointed that person? So a lot of times they're going to end up breaking the tie in favor of the appointment. The president pro tempore means for the time being, basically presides over the Senate when the vice president is not present, which is most of the time. The vice president doesn't set in on all the congressional time. They have more important things to do, I guess. If they know there's going to be a very, based on the whips and all this thing, they know when something's going to be very close, and they may bring him in to actually break the tie. But when he's not there, the president pro tem takes his place. Okay, this is usually going to be the person with the longest tenure on the majority party. All right, then you have the majority leader, and this tends to be the most important job in the Senate. Okay, they're the one that represents on the floor for the majority party, does most of the speaking for the majority party. Then you have majority whip in the Senate as well. They assist the leadership in managing the party's legislative program. They collect the votes, go around and see how everybody wants to vote, things like that, just like in the House. And then you have the minority leader, and the minority whip does the same thing as the majority party. I'm going to give you a few moments to write this down. Like I said, at this point, if you need to pause, do so now. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to continue on. All right, moving on. All right, next we're going to talk about the filibuster and cloture a little bit. I think there's a video at this point. It's going to be about 5 or 6 minutes. Fairly interesting video. Just kind of outlines the history of both and how we come about and what they've done. Then we're going to talk about a few other things: holds and unanimous consent within the Senate, and treaty ratification, how all those things come about.
These 100 people are the U.S. Senate. They pass laws. They vote, and when a majority says yes, it passes. But these days, the Senate doesn't do that very often.
The Senate holding 2 votes.
So I'm going to link this at the end. We're going to watch this at the end of this video, but not.
See, the Senate has this rule.
tagged into
It says before they vote,
the thing, and I'm not sure why this
60
is not
people
working,
have
but
to agree to
we'll come back to that. All right, give me 1 second. All right, so moving on. I don't know why it's making me, it's like it's pausing it. Give me just a second. On to the next slide. There we go. All right, so this only happens in the Senate. You know, the filibuster basically is just talking a bill to death. Okay, and we'll just kind of give you just a rundown of what each deals with and things like that. I said earlier, there's 100 people. Basically, what they want to do is, let's say you have 51 people who are for a bill. All right, but the other 49 are against it. They can get up and talk against the bill. Okay, and they can talk about it for as long as they want. 24 hours, like Strom Thurmond did. But at some point, they have to have 60 people vote to cloture, which basically means we're going to take a vote on this right now. We want this guy to shut up. We're tired of listening to it. So they vote to, basically shut it down, and go to an actual vote. Okay. And, these days, like we talked about, it doesn't even, it doesn't even have to actually get up and speak for 24 hours. Just the thought of it happening a lot of times they just go ahead and do the 60 people will come together to just make sure that doesn't happen. So it's really a broken system. Basically, the party that's against whatever's being done, all they have to do is say they're going to filibuster, and then they'll vote to just do away with that particular bill. And this happens a lot of times now, especially on big, very popular bills or very controversial bills. And like I said, cloture is just a vote to stop the filibuster. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is unanimous consent. This is, hold on 1 second, make sure I got this right. All right, so unanimous consent is basically, it's a lot like a filibuster. It can suspend the rules and limit the debate, and it speeds up the process to get a vote. But they have to actually all vote on it. All 100 people have to vote on it to make it happen. They can just decide, hey, we're not going to talk about this. We know we're going to pass it, or we know we're not going to pass it. So they unanimously decide they're going to just move on and go and do the vote. A hold is you can stall the discussion of a bill. It's used when someone objects to a bill being voted on. It's just, I don't really know. It doesn't happen a whole lot, so it's kind of somewhat irrelevant. But it's a less powerful, way of filibustering for the most part. Then you have a treaty ratification. This is basically, requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Back in Federalist Papers 75, Hamilton argued that he did not believe that the House should have the power, that the Senate only should have the power to handle any foreign affairs due to its continuity. They believed that the House, there was so much turnover and it was such a large body of people, they felt like it really did not meet the requirements to be able to handle such important affairs. So they felt like the Senate, being that it was a smaller body of people, longer terms, and for the most part older gentlemen, that's what it was made up of at the time, were more wise and things like that. They felt that group should be responsible for ratifying any kind of treaty that deals with foreign affairs. So this requires a 2/3 vote, a supermajority of the Senate, in order to pass those. And then the last part of this one is advice and consent. This basically deals with confirming presidential appointments. We talked earlier about how Betsy DeVos was confirmed. Any kind of members of the cabinet, ambassadors, federal judges, all this Supreme Court justices, this is all what the Senate does. They're the ones that get to determine whether or not a presidential appointment goes through. Usually they'll conduct interviews. We're about to have the new Supreme Court nominee by President Trump. She's about to go, forth, I think, maybe October 12th, and going to start conducting interviews with members of the Senate for them to get to know her and to answer any questions they may have, and then they'll hold a vote. All right, next we're going to talk about chamber-specific procedures, the rules and roles that impact policymaking. Talk about committees of the whole, the rules committee we talked about earlier, and something that's called a discharge petition. All right, we talked about rules committee, basically the House traffic cop. Like I said, they pretty much determine what's going to be heard, what's not going to be heard, and the majority party of the House controls that committee. So, nothing reaches the floor without them allowing it. So it's very, very beneficial to be within the majority party of the House, because if you're in the minority party, some things you put up may never even be heard. Then you have what's called committee of the whole. It's more relaxed rules to allow for longer debate on a bill. It's just a committee made up. It has to be at least 100 people or 100 members to be present to conduct business, but they can really slow things down. They allow non-voting delegates, such as U.S. territories, to actually vote in this. And if a committee approves the bill, then it can go to the full House. They'll use this a lot of times for very, very important things. But like I said, the key part here is they have to have at least 100 members present to be able to conduct a committee of the whole. The last thing is a discharge petition. This can force a bill out of committee and have it go ahead and be voted on right now. Think of it as being blasted out of committee like dynamite, discharge it out. A simple majority is always required for this to take effect. So if they say, hey, let's vote, we want to discharge this petition, somebody can suggest that. And if a simple majority decides to go in and put it out and vote on it right now, they can do that. Moving on now, we're going to talk about, I should have gave you a second to write that down, so I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. Like I said, feel free to pause this at any point if you need to write anything down if I go too fast. All right, moving on. All right, now we're going to talk about monetary issues again, generate budgets and things like that. We've kind of already covered that, but we're going to kind of go back over it a little bit. In review, we realize that Congress has the power to create a budget, right? We talked about that early on, and basically a budget is just a policy where they bring in burdens and benefits. We talked about that last week. Burdens and benefits. Burden is what you must pay. Okay, these are the things that are put out that you must provide money for, and then benefits is what comes in, and this is done by assessing taxes on different areas throughout the country. Sales tax, income tax, things like that, excise tax. So they bring in the money through tax, and then they spend the money on the burdens that they must pay. Okay. They must raise revenue through taxes. And like I said, that's where the federal government, for the most part, gets its money. State money gets it from state monies is raised through taxes, as well as monies that are raised by the federal government that is given to the state government. So the federal government is completely funded by taxes. All right. So first, we're going to talk about expenditures. Okay, this is basically just government spending. It's what the government spends all the money that it brings in on. The first part you have is discretionary spending. Congress can debate to determine who will get a piece of the pie. So it's up to their discretion on when they have these committees for budget committees and things like that, spending committees. That's where they determine where the money goes. Who gets this money, who gets that money. And so that's discretionary. So there it can be The money can be funded or it cannot. They decide. Okay, it's up to their discretion. And then you have mandatory spending. Okay, these are certain things, entitlement programs that must be covered as a result of legislation. So there are laws or things that are passed that require now that they must spend a certain amount of money to be able to fulfill the letter of the law of those bills, or those laws rather, those prior bills. So it's legislation that requires that money to be spent. Certain things like Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, unemployment programs. So those things require that a certain amount of money be provided for that. So they have to spend that money. We talk about a deficit. This is when your expenditures exceed revenue in a fiscal year. So basically, you're spending more money than you're bringing in, and it creates a deficit. And that's why the federal deficit is so high, because we do that a lot. They could require expenditures to equal revenue. Okay, we're talking about balancing a budget. I'm sorry. And I did pass through all this. Let me go back. I'm sorry. Let me go back and let you look at this for a minute. Pause if you need to. I'm going to give you about 15, 20 seconds, and then I'm going to move on. Okay. So now we're going to talk about balancing a budget. Okay. We talked about, if you create a household budget or budget for your business or even a budget for the government, the only way to balance that budget to where you have zero loss, zero gain is to require the expenditures, the amount that you're paying out, to equal the amount you're bringing in, or the revenue. Okay. That's one way that you can actually balance a budget. Well, how do you do that? You can cut discretionary spending. You have to spend on the mandatory stuff, but the discretionary spending you can cut. You can allocate less funds for certain things. Or you can increase taxes. Okay. And obviously both of these, could cause certain constituents to not be happy. So therefore that doesn't happen a whole lot, which is why we have such a insurmountable federal deficit. The alternative is just to increase budget deficit. So, if you don't do that, then, the deficit grows. All right, moving on. This next slide is, kind of lagniappe, it's extra stuff, but it's pretty interesting. You're talking about congressional salaries. What do these people make? Just for a regular congressperson, you're looking at $174,000 plus some very lucrative benefits. For the vice president and speaker of the House, they make about $223,500. For the majority and minority leaders and the president pro tempore, makes $193,400. Remember that the pay increase, if they vote themselves a pay increase, it does not take place until after the next congressional election. Therefore, you can't vote yourself a raise before, being voted out. So you vote in a raise and you get it, and you're not going to make the next congressional term. So it takes place the next time. That way, lame duck congressmen can't vote themselves a raise, make a little more money. And part of the benefits, they get travel allowances. Okay, so they can go around their state, and of course to Washington, things like that. It's all paid for, their travel. They get very, very low insurance rates. They get free health care, and they get a pension. Like I said, that's just some extra stuff. It's not necessarily needed. You probably won't see it on a test, but it's definitely some good information to know, just to make yourself a little smarter. You can pause this if you need to. I'm going to go ahead and move on now. Now we're going to get into something called pork barrel legislation and log rolling, okay, and how it affects lawmaking in both chambers. The power of the pork. Pork barrel spending is basically when you set aside money, you earmark money in a bill for a pet project in a congressman's district, okay? There can be bribes that are, set up with this, but basically I create a bill that provides funding for my particular state. It really buys that congressperson a lot of power with their constituents, because it's showing that, hey, that I'm using my power to help out my particular state or my particular area, more localized than, as far as the national government. I'm really helping my state situation be better. And a lot of times, they tie in money and things like that into certain bills for promise of voting for it. So, you got two congressmen on different party lines or whatever, or even the same. I'm going to vote for that bill if you'll kind of earmark some money for my particular state. Then you have what's called log rolling. This is basically where one congressman votes for another congressman's project in hopes of him doing the same. Okay, so it's kind of like you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Nothing illegal about that, but it's kind of, it's, however you view it, it is what it is. And then you have what's called a rider. Okay, and this is something that's completely non-related to a particular bill, but it's added in on the back end of another bill that's likely to pass, whether it be, something that maybe wouldn't pass on its own, but it's added to another bill, and it rides that bill into a law. This happens a lot of times where you may have a Democratic sponsored bill that they really, really want or need to pass, federal spending or, any kind of bill that really is very, very pertinent that it passes. And in order to get Republicans to go along with it, Republicans may kind of tag on a rider that maybe the Democrats normally wouldn't vote on, but it's maybe kind of very minor compared to what they're trying to get passed. So they'll allow it to be a rider and allow it to pass on through as long as the Republicans vote for what the Democrats are wanting to get passed. So it just allows for non-related things to kind of ride on the back of a more popular thing to get passed, and they both end up passing. All right, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Keep doing this. You pause it at this point if you want. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write this down, but obviously you can pause at any point, so give you about 30 seconds. All right, moving on. All right, now we're going to talk about ideological division within Congress that can cause gridlock or can create the need for negotiation and compromise. Okay, here's a partisan breakdown of the Congress. Okay, the 116th most current Congress. If you look at the House on the left right here, 234 seats are held by Democrats and 200 are held by Republicans, with one seat, obviously, being unfilled. So, Congress, or the House of Representatives, has a fairly strong majority Democrat seats, okay? And then over in the Senate, it's a little more, in relatively speaking, it's a little closer, but you have 53 out of the 100 seats are held by Republicans, and 45 are held by Democrats, and 2 are held by independents, but they caucus with the Democrats, so they lean a little more towards the Democrats. So you can see, even though it's fairly close to being 50-50, there is a majority on both. So when we talk about compromise or not to compromise, when you talk about the two parties working together, this is called bipartisanship. Okay, and this leads to negotiation and compromise. We'll do this, we'll do that, we'll help you out here if you do this, and that's how things get done. Okay, that's how things get passed. It really allows for the Congress to actually work and to accomplish the things they need to accomplish. Then you have partisanship. Okay, this is where one party kind of looks out for itself. Okay, and this leads to gridlock. They don't compromise, they don't negotiate, they just vote strictly for what they believe in, and this causes a lot of times for things just basically not get done. these two graphics right here, look on the left right here, this is the year 1951. There was a lot of bipartisanship, okay, people working with each other, crossing party lines, making concessions rather, to where they may vote on a bill that is completely against their party lines, but they do it for different reasons. And then you look on the right over here in 2007, this was a year of gridlock. Okay, Republicans stayed within their party, Democrats stayed within their party, and a lot of things just didn't get done. So you have to and it happens. It happens in different years. There's certain things that may be a very productive congressional session, and sometimes they're not. Okay, so bipartisanship leads to negotiation and compromise, and partisanship leads to gridlock. Make sure you know those two things. All right. The next two slides we're going to talk about, our next little part, we're going to talk about your about gerrymandering, redistricting, things like that. It deals with your two Supreme Court cases. I'm going to let you delve into those a little deeper yourself. But I just want you to know that we talk about redistricting. A census indicates change in population. It happens every 10 years. We're actually in the middle of one right now in 2020. The last one occurred in 2010. Okay, it happens every 10 years, and it impacts reapportionment. Okay, this is the allocating of congressional seats to each state. Obviously, over a course of 10 years, population changes. People move. New people are born. People die. All these things allow for obviously a very, very large change in population. This determines how many seats each state has in the House of Representatives, how they divide up those 435 seats. This has been going on since 1929. And since World War II, there's been a lot of growth in the West and in the South. Okay, so these areas, these states in these areas have gained more representation over that time. All right, I'm going to give you, obviously you can pause right here, but I'm going to give you a few seconds, probably 30 seconds to write this down. We'll move on to the next slide. I apologize about the dog barking in the background if you hear that. Some construction going on outside in the front yard, I think. Completely irrelevant, but if you do hear the dog barking, that's why. All right, moving on. This next slide is going to be a representation of reapportionment from back in 2010 after the last census. The states that are in the gray had no change; they maintained their same amount of representation. States in the dark blue actually gained members, and then states in the yellow lost members. I think prior to, Louisiana had 9, and then currently we have 6. And obviously the new census may change that, but just over those 10 years, the decrease in population caused Louisiana to lose representation in the House. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is creating districts. This is very, very important. How certain things are created. And the first term you're going to talk about is gerrymandering, something you may have heard of. This is basically drawing district lines to benefit a particular political party. Okay, and a lot of times it's unfair and it became illegal because they were doing it in ways to try to gain political advantage by drawing up these lines in all these crazy ways and really wild. You can see the weird looking picture over there. You always see this picture for gerrymandering. I don't know why, but just draw all these lines that don't make a whole lot of sense to try to gain all these different certain people of a certain political party into one area to where they could have a majority and actually win certain elections. Here's some requirements of creating districts. Okay. It has to be contiguous. Okay. It has to be, lost my word. It has to be basically touching or sharing a common border. So you can't just have a little area over here that's District 1, and then a little small area over here that's out by itself that's real tiny, not touching anything in District 1, and be a part of District 1. It has to be continuous and all in the same area and share the same borders. It also has to have the equal number of inhabitants. So you can have one district made up of 500-600 people, and then one made up of 30 people. Okay, it has to be fairly equal. Then it has to be compact. Okay, you can't have one huge area, and then a little small area that are competing against each other. Some strategies that they use for creating districts: they concentrate opposition in few districts. They pack them in. Okay, try to pack in the certain parties into one little area. And they may spread the opposition thinly to limit winning anywhere. This is called cracking. So packing and cracking are two strategies that are used when they create districts. You can pause right here. I'm going to leave it for a few seconds to write anything, but feel free to pause. All right, moving on. This little visual here basically just shows you gerrymandering, explains how gerrymandering happens and how it can create an unfair advantage for certain parties. If you look on the left here, it's making a representation of 50 people. Okay, you have 2 rows of red at 10 each, and then 3 rows of blue at 10 each. So you end up with a 60 to 40% advantage of blue over those 50 people. Okay, and depending on how you break them down and how you put them in districts, normally you would expect the blue to win. Okay, because they have the majority, actually have a super majority. So example number 1 here is a perfect representation. You have 3 blue districts and 2 red districts, so blue wins. Okay. Number 2 is another way to do it. It's compact. We talked earlier about it had to be compact. It can't be huge groups in certain areas and then small in the other. Everything is pretty much uniform here. But it's not really fair because they divide up the reds. They divide them up kind of unfairly to where they're always in every one of the districts are going to be the minority. So you end up having 5 blue district wins and 0 red, so blue wins. So that's unfair. That's a way of gerrymandering. And then you have the more common, or back in the day, what they did, it was neither compact nor fair. Okay, you had all these really weird shaped districts, and that's what they did. They would draw this up. And make it just, random ways of drawing lines to gain, they put, some of the blue in with a majority of the red and make it to where no matter what they draw, that, they can gain an advantage for the red. So right here, based on these lines, the blue only won 2 of the districts and the red won 3, so therefore red wins. So you take, what's obviously a majority blue in the way you draw it up to make it majority red. And that's gerrymandering explained. All right, here's we talked about, your different court cases. I'm going to allow you to look through those yourself. But basically, Baker versus Card dealt with reapportionment, and Shaw versus Reno dealt with gerrymandering. Okay. Now we're going to talk about different ways that the congressmen vote, talk about lame duck president, things like that, different initiatives, about divided government. Okay, in a perfect world for particular parties, you have the House and Senate controlled by a particular party and the president of that party. Okay, being the same party. But since 1968, there had only been 14 years where that's happened. In all those years, only 14 of those years where one party controls all 3 facets of the government. That particular facet, the House and the president. So you can look through the different administrations. You had Jimmy Carter, George Bush, part of Clinton, part of Barack Obama, or all of Clinton, all of Barack Obama, and then part of Donald Trump. Right now, it's not, because House of Representatives is Democrat and Senate is Republican held, but it hadn't happened a lot. Okay, and obviously you can see the benefit of this happening. Okay, if you're in a situation where you hold all three, you're not going to have a whole lot of opposition on passing through the things you want to pass through. So everything else, we deal with divided government. Okay, there are different things where, like right now, the president is Republican, the Senate is Republican, but the House is Democrat. Okay, so you can see there's going to be a lot of effects of that. You have partisan votes against presidential initiatives. Okay, so there's no bipartisanship. So the president tries to have certain things happen, and it gets shot down. Okay, people, if the Republican president is trying to get things going, the Democratic-held House can be against that. Congressional refusal to confirm appointments of a lame duck president. You have a president, if currently the Senate was held by the Democrats, anything that the president is trying, right now the president is trying to push through a new Supreme Court justice, that would not happen for sure if the House was held by the Democrats. Okay, they would be against the Republican president in any kind of appointments that he may have. The term of lame duck, let's say if Joe Biden wins the presidency in November, and Donald Trump decided he was just going to sit back and not do anything. He's not going to sign anything into law. He's not going to do anything that is proactive for the government that's going to help the Democrats. He's considered a lame duck president, and there's ways around that. For the Congress, they can, based on votes, 2/3 votes, they can overrule anything that he may do. All right. Did I fly by that? Yeah, go ahead and write that down real quick while I'm preparing for the next slide, which is actually the last slide. So we're almost finished with this. We're at about an hour in. Go ahead and finish that up. If you need to pause. But now we're going to talk about basically voting behavior from congressional members, different role conceptions of the trustee, the delegate, and the politico, and how it relates to the constituents, accountability to the constituents of their districts. So here are the voting options of congressmen. You have trustees, and these are people that use their conscience to vote. Okay, they're going to vote for what they think is right and vote against things they think are wrong. Okay, the general consensus is that Democrats are for abortion and Republicans are against. You could have a Republican who may vote for abortion because he believes in a woman's right to choose. You could have a Democrat who votes against abortion because he thinks it's wrong. These are usually considered trustee voters. They vote on their, based on right or wrong of their conscience. All right, then you have delegate voters, delegates. They are basically an agent for those who elected them. Okay, they're going to vote with how they feel that their constituents want them to vote. It doesn't matter if it goes against their party lines. They're going to do what they feel like their constituents want them to do. Then you have partisan voters. They hold allegiance to their party. Okay, they're going to vote party lines no matter what. They're not going to go against whatever the party feels is the best interest in that particular vote. And then you have politicos. This is a combination of all of the above. Okay, they may vote on certain things with their conscience. They may vote on certain things with allegiance to their party, and they may vote on certain things that go along with their constituents. Okay, so all four of those make up the different types of votes that you have in Congress. All right, so I can't get this video to work. It has something to do with the microphone not allowing any kind of audio from the computer, so we're not going to be able to watch that video, but that's fine. We're about an hour in. I will link this video to the with this lecture video, so feel free to click on that link. Like I said, it's about a 6-minute video, but it will allow you to watch that a little bit at the end of this and kind of just learn a little more about filibusters and cloture. All right. If you have any questions, please just put them in Google Classroom. Once all this is done, you can continue working on the congressional project that I passed out the other day, or your reading questions. Just kind of work on whatever you can, and I will see you guys soon.